All right, Second Kings 12 and Second Chronicles 24 both talk about the same exact time in Judah's history. Athaliah is out of the picture, and little Joash becomes king at the youngest king ever at age 7. When you want to determine what a country or a group or a family or an individual values, where do you look? Well, you hear the expression, follow the money. Look at what they spend money on. There's a lot of talk right now in our government about what we're spending money on, or what we have spent money on, or what we're planning to spend money on. Whenever two people say I do and they get married, part of pre-marriage counseling is, okay, well, what does your budget look like? And usually one of the two is better with the budget or more careful or tracking it more, whatever it is. But two people that get married have very different ideas of how they're going to spend money. And so we tell people when they get married, combine your finances. Oh, no, I want my money. I want him or her to have her money. They can do that. And we're going to meet in the middle for paying the bills or certain things. But I want to have my own money. It doesn't usually work well long term in a marriage. Um, but when you follow the money, it reveals what you value. There's going to be some money here that we're going to follow in how Joash and Jehoiada, they're the two main characters, Jehoiada being the priest and Joash being the king. Now, as a 7-year-old becomes king, he doesn't have a lot of wisdom. And because of that, he doesn't have life experience. He's not going to be given a lot of authority. As he gets older, I don't know if there was an age. It may be, I think Joash or Josiah later is 8 years old. When he becomes 16, it's kind of when he gets the authority of the king to start making kingly decisions. But it sounds like Jehoiada is mentoring him and almost like an apprentice. Even though he has the title, Joash has the title of king, he's not given, okay, I want to kill these people. You're 7. Okay. Probably that wasn't given to him for a period of time until he got some maturity, probably sometime in his teens, that he has the full authority of a king. So, how does King Joash, spend the royal treasury? I ask you this question in the introduction, and we'll find out. This is probably going to be a two-part because there's so much detail that I don't want to miss. Um, and because it says he's a godly king, we're going to learn some of the mistakes of godly kings. I don't know if there's any godly king that doesn't have a weakness. Okay. He's number 3 of 8 of the godly kings. So he's the first of 4 in a row. Okay. So his son, grandson, and great grandson are all going to be said to do what's right in the sight of God. That's number 3, 4, 5, and 6 of 8. So 2 before him, Asa and Jehoshaphat. Those were his great grandfather and great great grandfather that he didn't know. And then he'll have 4 generations here of godly kings, and he's the first. He starts this godly king pattern, which is good to see because you know what's happening in the north. They've gone from Ahab, which awful idolatry, to Jehu, still following though Jeroboam's golden calves. You're like, ah. And Israel never in the north never follows the Lord with their whole heart and never seek God. The people that were seeking God in that kingdom have gone to Judah, and they are living among the tribe of Judah. All right, so a couple other questions to think about. How did God plan to fund the temple and his servants, the priests and the Levites? So there were two parts. Whenever God gave Moses the law and the tabernacle was movable, but they provided for years until the temple. That was 1400s BC. The temple's not built till 900. So 400 to 500 years, the tabernacle was moved around, probably provided for, but with a temporary structure comes less maintenance. With a permanent structure like the temple comes more maintenance. Okay. And then if you look at the wealth, if you have a house and you look at a house, let's say in Lowell, that has a Victorian, huge Victorian house, Belvedere area, you're like, oh, the maintenance on that thing is gonna kill you. Okay. The utilities are high, the maintenance high is so much detail of the trim and everything. You're like, oh man, to maintain that thing in this climate, it'd be really challenging. Okay. So the bigger your property, the bigger your structure, the more maintenance they're going to require. So the temple was grand, but it's going to require maintenance. So from the time Solomon builds the temple, 966 BC, to when Joash becomes king, becomes king in 835. Okay, so 130 years or so that Joash lives. So he inherits a kingdom and he inherits a temple that saved his life, but it was neglected. And actually, we'll find out it was gutted a little bit. That they're going to try to replenish this and repair it, and it's going to be a process. All right. So we see in Numbers 27 and Leviticus 27, Numbers 18, that there was a tithe, which was required. It's almost like a tax. We don't require people in church to tithe. There might be some churches that require tithe, but New Testament we don't. We say it's an encouraged to tithe. It's a good rule of thumb, good starting place. But in the Old Testament, it was required of Israel in Leviticus 27 and Numbers 18 that you had to tithe to support the Levites in particular. And so the Levites aren't going to give an inheritance, and they're going to take your sacrifices. They're going to help the priests. So the priests and Levites are supported completely by Israel as they're faithful to God. God's blessing them. And a tenth of everything that the people get once a year, they go and they give a tithe to the temple, which would support the Levites. We don't have, though, a place where a tithe was supposed to support the temple. We have in Deuteronomy 14 that every 3 year a tithe was supposed to be local to support the poor. Think of our church, the fellowship fund. Okay. So every 3 years they had another tithe that they would use to support the poor. So they're supporting the Levites and the priests. They're helping the poor. And there was a third tithe in Deuteronomy 14 that was take a tenth of what God has blessed you with, and you're going to go take that and celebrate at one of the times where you 3 times a year you go celebrate at the sanctuary. It says if it's too far, you can't do that, sell it, take the money and go take the money and buy a celebration, pay for it's like paying for a vacation that would be focused around God and the sanctuary in Jerusalem. So that was a third tithe. Now, how did God want the temple to be paid for? All right. So that's a question that we're going to try to find out here. And we're going to assume, from what we know about Jehoiada, that he knows the law and he's not going to allow little Joash, King Joash, to disobey the law. Okay. So we're going to assume, based on what we've seen of Jehoiada so far, he's a priest. He's very concerned about we've got to follow the law of Moses. So nobody unclean, nobody that's not a Levite can come into the temple, even when Joash is protected and crowned king. And remember how old Jehoiada is. He's 90 years old when Joash becomes king, at least 90. Okay. And so if we do the math with Jehoiada, he was born when Rehoboam, Solomon's son, was king. So he is born roughly, if he lives 130 years, which we'll find out in this text, that's how old he is when he dies, and it's near the end of Joash's reign of 40 years. Jehoiada was alive. He was 11 or 12 years old when Rehoboam, this is Solomon's son, divided the kingdom. Rehoboam is king, and at the end of Rehoboam's 17-year reign, Jehoiada is 11 or 12 years old. So you remember who was president when you were 11 or 12. Now, you probably weren't into politics at 11 or 12. Most people aren't at 11 or 12, but I remember who was president when I was 11 or 12. I'm aware of the country I'm in. I know what country I'm in. I know who the president is. I know if what my parents think of the president at the time that you're 11 or 12. So you probably remember when you were 11 or 12 who the president was, kind of the flavor of politics in the country. So imagine Jehoiada lives during Rehoboam, then his son Abijah for a year or two, then Asa, godly king, for 41 years. And everybody had to serve God with their whole heart. They had to seek God or they were put to death. Jehoshaphat for 25 years. All this Jehoiada is alive. Okay. And now Jehoram, 8 years, awful. He kills all of his brothers. And then his son Ahaziah, younger king, only 1 year, and Jehu wipes him out. Then Athaliah, the ungodly, awful, heathen, pagan wife of Jehoram, is ruling for 6 years. And at this point, Jehoiada is now 90 years old. Okay. So if you ask Jehoiada what he has seen a lot of variety of ungodly and godly kings. Okay. And in that 90 years, if you still had your right mind at 90 and you're going to live to 130, he's like middle aged. All right. That's hard for us to imagine someone 130. But if you are 60 today and you live to 90, okay, you still got 30 more years. And so if you are 90 and live into 130, okay, you still got 40 more years. And from what we can tell, he is a godly influence for almost all of Joash's reign. And remember, Joash is alive because Jehoiada helped him survive as a 1 year old, and Jehoiada's wife, Jehoshabeath. Okay, so 2 Kings 12, we'll start there today. And we'll probably just get up to verse 16. So 2 Kings 12, 1 to 16 is the same amount of time as 2 Chronicles 24, 1 to 16. What'll probably be easiest for us to do is look at 2 Kings 12, 1 to 16. We'll read it, a few comments, and then we'll go to 2 Chronicles 24 for the rest of the time. All right, 2 Kings 12, verses 1 to 16. In the 7th year of Jehu, a time reference to the northern kingdom, Jehoash or Joash, they're the same guy. Jehoash and Joash, same name, began to reign, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abiah of Beersheba, so we know who his mother was. And we know who his father was, Ahaziah. And so Ahaziah was dead when Joash was a year old. And Jehoash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all his days, because Jehoiada the priest instructed him. All right, let's stop there. And I told you to go to 2 Chronicles 24. Hold your hand in 2 Kings 12. Let's read those couple verses and notice the difference. 2 Chronicles 24, verses 1 and 2. We'll probably read 1 to 3. Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abiah of Beersheba. And Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest. What's that sound like?
Yeah, after a while he wasn't.
After Jehoiada dies, what happens? Okay. The connection with Jehoiada is clear. Okay. Now let's go back to 2 Kings 12 and see, knowing what 2 Chronicles 24, 2 said. Jehoash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all his days because Jehoiada the priest instructed him. Okay.
Sounds like a contradiction.
It's actually a reason. Why does Joash do what's right? Because Jehoiada is influencing him. And so when Jehoiada's influence is gone, now we're wondering what is he like as a king? And we're not going to have time to get to it today. Next week, Lord willing, we'll look at that. So keep that in mind, because those both give Jehoiada credit for Joash's godly doing what's right in the sight of God. Jehoiada gets credit for that. Okay. And he's influencing constantly the king, and the king listens to his influence, and he follows Jehoiada's lead, and he's learning the law, and he's trying to obey the commands. Okay, verse 3 of back to Second Kings 12. Nevertheless, the high places were not taken away. The people continued to sacrifice and make offerings on the high places. And if you read through the godly kings, I'm not sure any of the godly kings. There might have been one, maybe Hezekiah later. All of them leave the high places, and they weren't supposed to. And so this is a black eye on the nation of Judah. But it's a mention that they're doing what's right, they're serving God, they're trying to serve God the right way, but they don't deal with these high places, which is trying to serve God and all these different locations on every high hill. All right, back to verse 4. Jehoash said to the priests, all the money of the holy things that is brought into the house of the Lord, the money for which each man is assessed, the money from the assessment of persons, and the money that a man's heart prompts him to bring into the house of the Lord, let the priest take each from his donor, and let them repair the house wherever any need of repairs is discovered. So he's saying anybody who is giving their money in a tithe to the Levites are supposed to take some of that money, and they are going to, he wants them to pay for repairs. In Second Chronicles 24, he says to the priests in a little different way, I want you to go out and I want you to extract money or tax people, and I want you to collect what the New Testament in Jesus' day was a temple tax. Remember the temple tax where the fish, they got the fish and got the money out of the fish's mouth to pay for Peter and Jesus, which was a half shekel, which a commentator said about 2 days' wages. So in our money, $200 a day, you roughly earn, that's $400. And it said the poor and the rich alike are supposed to pay the same amount. What if you tell someone who's poor, you need to pay $400? They'd be like, that's a lot of money. Someone who's wealthy, not a big deal. And so God said, and so let's see what his reasoning is. All right, so we don't have in Second Kings 12. So we may have to go over to Chronicles. All right, so by the 23rd, verse 6 of Second Kings 12, but by the 23rd year of King Jehoash, so 7 plus 23, he's 30 years old. And this is more than halfway through his reign of 40 years. The priests had made no repairs on the house. Okay. So he wants the Levites to pay for this out of their livelihood. So the money that you guys get to live on, which is how the tithe was to work, was to support the Levites, not to repair the temple. He says, I want you to take that money and I want you to use some of it to repair the temple. They're like, how are we going to live and repair the temple? It's like if you guys as a church expected Pastor Ty and I to say, okay, take all of your money and you guys maintain the church building, plus your homes, plus the parsonage. You're like, yeah, okay, that's gonna be hard, okay, unless we have more resources, right? And so let's hold our hand here and go over to Second Chronicles 24 and see what he says there. It's similar, and the reasons that he gives. Okay, so Second Chronicles 24, verse 4. We didn't get verse 3. Jehoiada got for him 2 wives, and he had sons and daughters. You think, if Jehoiada was a godly man, why did he get Joash 2 wives? Interesting. Now, this is less than probably all the other kings around him. So this is probably a godly reaction to a multiplying of wives. But think about it. Joash does not have a brother to take over the kingdom. Joash's first wife has to have sons. If she doesn't have sons, the kingdom dies. And so that might be in Jehoiada's thinking, like, we have to make sure. We have to make sure that this king, who's the last remaining seed of David, has sons, and the son is able to rule. And so that might be the thinking of behind the 2 wives. This is the only mention of it. Kings didn't mention that. So back to verse 4 of Second Chronicles 24. After this, Joash decided to restore the house of the Lord. So it seems like it's his idea, which is good, a good idea. And he gathered the priests and Levites and said to them, now Jehoiada is part of this group. Go out to the cities of Judah and gather from all Israel money to repair the house of your God from year to year. See that you act quickly. So he's expecting yearly forced payment. We'd say it's a tax, or it would have to be one of those tithes. But the Levites did not act quickly. Okay, they didn't obey what the king said. So the king summoned Jehoiada the chief. And now Jehoiada is here again and says to him, why have you not required the Levites to bring in from Judah and Jerusalem the tax levied by Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the congregation of Israel for the tent of testimony? For the sons, and he gives a reason why it is in need of repair. Plus, there's not furniture in there because the sons of Athaliah, that's Athaliah's husband, and her sons, Ahaziah was Joash's dad who was killed. That wicked woman had broken into the house of God and had also used the dedicated things of the house of the Lord for the Baals. Okay. So they may have taken the gold out of God's house, melted it down, and made images or made things, utensils for the house of Baal. Okay. So they looted God's house. And so Joash, you're like, oh, okay, Joash, this kind of makes sense. But he says that there was this tax that Moses required. So I look back to see the tithes, and there was never a tax for on the people except for Exodus 30. Now, Exodus 30, if when the kings were to count a census, that was when they had to require everyone to pay about $400 a person, poor and rich alike. And so God discouraged Israel from counting the people. Remember when David counted the people? God had a plague on them. And so Jehoiada knows that. And Jehoiada says, this is not an expectation of a tax. This is, don't count the people, or you're going to have to require a ransom. The Exodus 30, you can look at it, says a ransom for their life. So God doesn't send a plague and kill people if you count them like other nations count their people to see how many warriors you have. I don't want you to do that. I want you to rely on me. Okay, so Exodus 30 discourages people, the king, from having a census. And if you're going to have a census, you're going to have to tax the people. So when he says, I just want you to go get money from people to repair the temple, Jehoiada is thinking, this is not a commendation. God's keeping us from counting the people. And so and that's likely why Jehoiada tells the priests, we're not going to be able to do this. Joash might not understand Exodus 30, but when he understands it, God's trying to keep us from counting people, not encouraging us to go count people and then take $400 from all of them. Okay, so how did previous generations pay for the temple then? You remember how David and Solomon paid for the temple? It was by their royal treasury. Okay, so remember David's conquest, and he set aside 100,000 talents, was it, of gold? And he said, Solomon, I've saved all of this from all of my looting, all of my treasury. I have got this war chest, really, and we're going to use this money, Solomon, to build the temple. Okay. Now, that's from what I can tell is how they got money to build the temple in the first place. It was the royal treasury. So the king and his conquests and his treasury is how he's going to provide for. This is different than how you would expect. Oh, the people have to pay for this. No, not in this time. It sounds like the king, the godly king David and Solomon, they used the king's money to build the temple. Now, I think there were some nobles that gave during Solomon's time as well, but it wasn't a tax. It wasn't forced people to pay. Okay, like the tithe was to support the Levites and other things. So and we know later that Joash has money. He just doesn't want to spend his money on the temple. Going to see what he does with his money later whenever he gets attacked. He's going to use that money for something else. Okay. So Joash has money available from generations previously too, but he wants to keep that money. And I don't want to it sounds like I don't want to spend my money on the temple. I want the people to pay for that. So you go get the people this is what Moses said. And Jehoiada is thinking, no, this isn't what Moses said. You're kind of making this up, which is why there was this delay. And we get 23 years into, so Joash is 30 years old and it still hasn't been done yet. Um, so back to 2 Kings 12. So they didn't do it in the 23rd year, and Joash summoned Jehoiada and says, "Hey, why are you not repairing?" Verse 7 of 2 Kings 12. Why are you not repairing the house? Now, therefore, take no more money from your donors, but hand it over for the repair of the house. All right. So they agreed. So he's like, don't support yourselves with your money. Give us your personal money, the Levites' money, so we can repair the house. So the priests agreed that they should take no more money and they should not repair the house. Okay, it sounds like it's a contradiction, and I looked up different translations and they all say the same thing. So the priest said, okay, we're not going to take my money, but we're not going to be able to repair the house with the money that we have. Okay. So it's kind of like, okay, if you want us to pay for it, we can't pay for this, Joash, with our money. So both Chronicles and Kings say that and then say something along the lines that Joash or Jehoiada, they take a chest, they bore a hole in it. So instead of forced, now it's going to be a free will offering, and that is fine. God always allows his people to give. That's kind of how Solomon does it whenever he builds a temple. He has a free will offering. People can give, not forced, but free will. That's what free will offering is. And so he says, okay, we're not going to exact the money from people. We're going to make it optional. Okay, so that's what we'll see in Second Chronicles 24 as well. Verse 9. Then Jehoiada the priest took a chest, bored a hole in the lid of it, and set it beside the altar on the right side at the enters as one enters the house of God. So it's accessible to everyone coming to worship. And instead of the priest going to uh, exact the money, they're guarding the threshold to put in it all the money that was brought into the house of the Lord, so no one can come and steal the money. And whenever they saw that there was much money in the chest, they could see it filling up. The king's secretary and the high priest came up and they bagged and counted the money that was found in the house of the Lord. Then they would give the money that was weighed out into the hands of the workmen who had oversight of the house. So they paid for the repairs. They paid the guys, construction guys, for doing the work, but it was all volunteer funds that were given, and they paid it out to the carpenters and the builders who worked on the house of the Lord, and to the masons and the stone cutters. So there was a lot of masonry work. If you remember how the timbers and the stones that were cut for Solomon's temple, all that was probably the mortar and other things needed to be repaired. Maybe some stones had cracked or were loose, and as well as to buy timber and quarried stone to make repairs on the house of the Lord for any outlay for the repairs of the house. But there were not made for the house of the Lord basins of silver, snuffers, bowls, trumpets, or any vessels of gold or of silver for the money that was brought into the house of the Lord. For that was given to the workmen who were repairing the house of the Lord with it. And they did not ask for an accounting from the men, in whose hand they delivered the money to pay out to the workmen. So there wasn't a audit. There wasn't okay, keep a spreadsheet and we'll make sure that you're spending exactly what's coming in. For why? Because they dealt honestly. They didn't even have to do this. This is a wonderful Time in Judah's history, that there's honesty, people fearing God. They're doing it the right way. Verse 16, the money from the guilt offerings and the money from the sin offerings was not brought into the house of the Lord because it belonged to the priests. Okay, so we have it here. The priests were expected to pay. They said we can't live and repair the house of the Lord because it's huge. It's a huge task. We still have to survive, our families, and how God has designed it that these offerings are going to be to provide for the priests. So the free will offerings paid for the workers, and so now we'll go over to Second Chronicles 24 and here. All right, Second Chronicles 24. We have more of a political, what's going on politically in Kings with Israel and Judah. Chronicles seems to be more of a spiritually, what's going on spiritually in the hearts and minds and lives of the people, and how is the king um, helping the people to serve God. Okay, verse 8 of Second Chronicles 24. We'll read down to verse 16. So the king commanded, and they made a chest and set it outside the gate of the house of the Lord, and a proclamation was made throughout Judah and Jerusalem to bring in for the Lord the tax that Moses, the servant of God, laid on Israel in the wilderness. All right, so they said that but then I don't know if they followed up or it was optional. And all the princes and all the people rejoiced. Uh, so this isn't a something they're done grudgingly because they're rejoicing in the fact, and they brought their tax and dropped it into the chest until they had finished. So maybe they counted people. If they did, people were happy. I'm not sure exactly to compare these two passages. So they delayed. They may have done part of it. It may have been a free will offering. Verse 11, and whenever the chest was brought to the king's officers by the Levites, when they saw that there was much money in it, the king's secretary and the officer of the chief priest would come and empty the chest and take it and return it to its place. Thus they did day after day and collected money in abundance, and the king and Jehoiada gave it to those. So the king and Jehoiada working together, and it's possible that Jehoiada didn't want to exact the money, but instead gave people an option to bring it. And so partially fulfilling the king and maybe adjusting the king's expectation of going out and forcing people to pay. All right, so they hired masons and carpenters to restore the house of the Lord in verse 12, and also the workers in iron and bronze to repair the house of the Lord. So those who were engaged in the work labored, and the repairing went forward in their hands, and they restored the house of God to its proper condition and strengthened it. And when they had finished, they brought the rest of the money before King Jehoiada. With it were made utensils for the house of the Lord. So in Kings, it says they didn't make utensils, and here it says they did. And it might be that this just has a more full account of there was extra money after they paid for the repairs. They didn't take it from the priests. The priests didn't have to do this on their own. So they had extra money and they made utensils to replace what Athaliah and her sons took, both for the service and for the burnt offerings and the dishes of incense, vessels of gold and silver, and they offered burnt offerings in the house of the Lord regularly all the days of Jehoiada. We'd love to see Joash there, but it doesn't say Joash. Okay. So remember, the temple is neglected during at least 15 years before Joash, after Jehoshaphat dies. His son, his grandson, and then his daughter-in-law, awful. They pretty much closed the temple. So secluded was the temple that it allowed Joash to survive in there for 6 years. And so desperately needed repair, desperately needed more utensils and more vessels of of worship. And then when the temple is repaired, they start offering burnt offerings to the Lord regularly, which was daily, all the days that Jehoiada is the priest. And it is so wonderful that God allows Jehoiada to live to be 130 years old. Because he's 90 years old when Joash becomes king, at least. And you're thinking, this guy is ready to die. Because all the other kings around him die at 67, 68 is the oldest king that dies that we know of. And here's Jehoiada as a 90-year-old, and he's still going strong. And at 110, he's still going strong. 120, he's still going strong. It's like Moses and Aaron. And then 130, God allows this man to live 130 years, full of days. He grows old, full of days, and he dies. He was 130 years old at his death. This is fascinating where they bury him. And they buried him in the city of David among the kings. This is why I say that Jehoiada should be up there in our thinking with Samuel and Moses and Daniel. The godly men of the Old Testament have very little negative said about them. This guy did a lot for Israel, and he influenced this kingdom and put them on a path that for generations after he dies, they're still going strong. And he is credited for Joash's godliness. And so all of his days, they're following the Lord. And he is honored in a way that I don't think anyone non-king, anyone who's not a king, was honored. They so honored this man that they buried him with the kings because he had done good in Israel and toward God and his house. All right, and we'll stop there with our text this morning. We'll look at the end of Joash's reign next week, and it's not quite as good as Jehoiada's life. So, in transitioning to next week, following a godly parent or following a godly mentor or a disciple maker is good. to get you and to keep you from on this path of fearing and obeying and loving God by following Christ. However, the real test of our life's direction comes when the person or persons that are godly influence in our lives are taken away. And if we will continue to fear and obey and love God supremely by following and imitating Christ without human influence. That's the real test.